"Step aside, bitch." That was all he said. One TSA supervisor, puffed up with borrowed authority, pointed his finger directly in the face of a woman who had seen things that would make grown men weep. He didn't ask. He didn't explain. He grabbed her bag like it was luggage left behind at a bus stop, yanked it open with both hands, and started pulling out her belongings one by one in front of hundreds of watching strangers. He laughed. His coworkers laughed, and she just stood there, completely still, watching him with eyes that had seen war. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that two sets of eyes on the other side of that terminal had already stopped moving. One belonged to a Navy SEAL, the other belonged to his dog, and neither of them looked away. If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now and follow this story all the way to the end, because what happens next is something you will not want to miss. Drop a comment and tell me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning had started the way most mornings at Reagan National Airport started. Loud, crowded, and completely indifferent to the lives passing through it. Hundreds of people moved like water through the terminal, dragging roller bags, holding coffee cups, checking their phones, living inside their own private worlds. Nobody looked at anybody for too long. That was the unspoken rule of air travel. Keep moving, mind your business, and get to your gate. Emma Carter did not stand out. That was, in many ways, the whole point. She was 41 years old, though most people would have guessed younger. She wore dark jeans, a gray pullover, and a pair of worn boots that had seen more mileage than most people's cars. Her dark hair was pulled back, not styled. Her face was clean of makeup. There was nothing about her appearance that invited a second glance, and she preferred it that way. She had spent years learning how to disappear inside a crowd, and she was very, very good at it. She stood in the security line with her two bags positioned exactly the way she always positioned them. Personal carry-on in her right hand, the black medical duffel on her left shoulder, close to her body. The duffel was heavy and she carried it like it weighed nothing, because to her, it didn't. She had carried heavier things in far worse places. The line moved slowly. Emma was patient. She had waited longer under considerably more stressful circumstances. 3 people ahead of her, a father was struggling to fold a stroller while his toddler screamed. 2 people behind her, a businessman was arguing loudly into his phone about a missed connection. Around her, the whole chaotic symphony of a busy American airport played out without pause. Emma watched all of it without appearing to watch any of it. Her eyes moved constantly, but her face stayed calm. That was when she first noticed him. The TSA supervisor was standing near the far end of the conveyor belt, arms crossed, jaw working like he was chewing on something that had already lost its flavor. He was a stocky man in his mid-40s with a name badge that read Hargrove in capital letters. He had the look of someone who had decided somewhere around 15 years ago that his authority was the most important thing in his world, and had spent every day since then proving it to people who couldn't push back. Emma had seen that look before. She filed it away, said nothing, and waited. She placed her bags on the conveyor belt when she reached the front. She removed her boots, placed them in the gray bin, set her phone and watch beside them. She had done this hundreds of times. She was efficient and quiet, and she moved through the process the way a professional moves through anything, without wasted motion. The conveyor belt carried her bags through the X-ray machine. She walked through the body scanner without incident. She was reaching for her boots when Hargrove appeared at her side. "Ma'am." He said it the way people say a word when they don't actually mean the politeness behind it. "Step over here." Emma looked at him. "Is there a problem?" "Your bag flagged." He gestured toward the black duffel, which had come through the machine and was now sitting in a separate tray, being examined by a younger agent. "We need to take a look." "That's fine," Emma said. "I'll need to be present when you open it. There are items inside that require careful handling." Hargrove looked at her the way some people look at a child who has just said something they find amusing. "Lady, I'm going to need you to step over there and let my agent do his job." I understand, Emma said, keeping her voice completely level. And I'm not asking you to stop the inspection. I'm asking to be present for it. There is sensitive medical equipment in that bag, and some of it requires supervision before it's handled. I can explain everything if you give me 60 seconds. Ma'am, Hargrove took a step closer. His voice dropped, but not in a way that suggested privacy, in a way that suggested he wanted her to feel small. I'm going to say this one more time. Step aside. The younger agent, whose badge read Morris, was already pulling the duffel toward him. He unzipped it without waiting. Emma's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. She took a breath. Sir, I am formally requesting— Step aside, bitch. The words came out of Hargrove's mouth flat and casual, like he said them every day, like they meant nothing, like she meant nothing. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't look around to see who was listening. He said it the way a man says something when he is completely confident that there will be no consequences. The people closest to the checkpoint heard it. A woman in a red coat turned her head sharply. A teenage boy looked up from his phone. The father with the stroller stopped moving entirely. Emma did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She stepped to the side, exactly where he pointed, and she clasped her hands in front of her, and she waited. And the stillness with which she did it, the absolute unshakable calm, was somehow more alarming than if she had said anything at all. Hargrove turned to Morris and gave a small nod, like they had won something. Morris began pulling items out of the black duffel. The first things out were familiar enough: a compression tourniquet, vacuum sealed and military grade, a chest seal kit, a bottle of hemostatic gauze still in its original packaging, a blood pressure cuff that looked nothing like the kind you'd buy at a pharmacy, a small case of surgical tools, sealed and sterile, the kind that required a medical license to possess legally. Morris slowed down. He picked up one of the items and turned it over in his hands. He glanced at Hargrove. Hargrove shrugged. Keep going. Then Morris pulled out the badge. It was not a hospital ID. It was not a nursing license card. It was a military identification badge, dark in color, with a specific set of symbols that most people, including Morris, had never seen before. It was worn at the edges. It had been carried for a long time. Morris held it up. He turned it toward Hargrove. Hargrove took it. He looked at it. He turned it over. He read the front. He read the back. He looked at Emma. Where did you get this? It's mine, Emma said. Hargrove laughed. It was not a kind laugh. Right. He held it up for Morris to see. You see this? Stolen valor. This woman is carrying stolen military identification. He said it loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. He wanted an audience. He had found one. That badge is authentic, Emma said. Her voice was still even, still quiet, still completely controlled. And I would strongly suggest you stop handling it and put it back in my bag. You'd suggest that, huh? Hargrove set the badge on the counter. And what unit is this from, exactly? Because I've never seen this insignia in my life. You wouldn't have, Emma said simply. Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the crowd and shook his head with the slow, performative disbelief of a man playing to a gallery. Folks, we've seen everything now. He tapped the badge with 2 fingers. Lady thinks she's special forces. A couple of people near the back of the crowd laughed nervously. Most of them didn't. The woman in the red coat had stopped pretending to do anything else. She was watching Emma with an expression that was harder to read. Something between concern and recognition. Emma said nothing. She stood with her hands clasped, her posture straight, her eyes on Hargrove, and she waited. It was the waiting that was most unnerving to the people watching. There was no pleading in her face, no embarrassment, no anger. She looked at Hargrove the way a mountain looks at a cloud passing over it. That was when the dog moved. Across the terminal, maybe 40 feet away, there was a man sitting in a row of plastic chairs near a coffee kiosk. He was tall and broad and built in the way that suggests the body was shaped by necessity rather than vanity. He wore civilian clothes, dark pants, a simple jacket, but he sat with the particular stillness of someone trained to observe. A black Malinois sat at his feet, leash loose, perfectly relaxed. Until it wasn't. The dog's head came up. Its ears moved forward. Its eyes locked onto the checkpoint area with the kind of focus that turns an animal from a companion into something else entirely. The man felt the change in the leash before he looked up. When he did, his eyes found the checkpoint, found the crowd, found Emma, found the badge sitting on the counter. His name was Marcus Hale. He was 38 years old. He had spent 11 years in the Naval Special Warfare Command. He had done things in places that didn't officially exist, alongside people who were not officially there. He was flying home to see his daughter for the first time in 4 months, which was the only reason he had been sitting quietly and minding his own business. He was not minding his own business anymore. He leaned forward in his chair. His elbows went to his knees. His eyes did not leave Emma or the badge on the counter. The Malinois, whose name was Rex, though almost no one called him that except Marcus, stayed perfectly still, but his body was oriented now, turned toward the checkpoint, every muscle in him tuned to something only he could fully process. Marcus watched Hargrove pick up the badge again, watched him hold it up, watched him laugh. Something shifted behind Marcus's eyes. He knew that insignia. He had seen it exactly 3 times in his entire career. Each time had been in a classified briefing. Each time the people associated with that insignia had been described in language that was careful and precise and very, very specific. The unit did not appear in any public record. It was not referenced in any official military registry available to standard clearance. It was, as far as most people who wore a uniform were concerned, a ghost. And this woman was standing at an airport security checkpoint while a TSA supervisor waved her badge around like a prop. Marcus stood up. Rex stood up with him. Marcus did not move toward the checkpoint immediately. He moved the way he had been trained to move in any uncertain situation, deliberately measuring everything, making sure of what he was seeing before he committed to any action. He positioned himself at the edge of the crowd where he had a clear line of sight to Emma, to Hargrove, to Morris, and to the badge. He watched Emma's face. He had been taught to read people under pressure, and what he saw in her face told him more than the badge did. She was not afraid. She was not embarrassed. She was not performing patience. She was genuinely patient, in the way that only comes from a person who has faced far worse and knows, with absolute certainty, how things will eventually resolve. She had been here before. Not at this airport, not at this checkpoint, but in this exact dynamic, surrounded by people who underestimated her, who dismissed her, who wanted her to feel small, and she had outlasted all of them. Marcus looked at the badge one more time. He crossed the terminal. Rex moved at his left side, silent, watchful, close. Hargrove was still performing for the crowd when he noticed the man approaching. He noticed Rex first. The dog had a way of commanding space. And then he noticed Marcus, and something in his expression changed slightly. Not enough. Not nearly enough. "Sir, this is a restricted area," Hargrove said, holding up one hand. "You need to step back." Marcus stopped just outside the barrier. He looked at Hargrove. He looked at Morris. He looked at Emma, who had not turned around yet, though she was aware of his presence. She was always aware of everything. Then he looked at the badge on the counter. "Where did you get that?" His voice was quiet, not aggressive, not loud. The kind of quiet that takes up more space than shouting. Hargrove blinked. "Excuse me?" "The badge," Marcus pointed to it. "On the counter. Where did you get it?" "We pulled it out of her bag," Hargrove gestured toward Emma. "She claims it's hers. We have reason to believe." "Put it back," Marcus said. Hargrove stared at him. "I'm sorry?" "That badge." Marcus looked at it one more time, and something in his expression was difficult to describe. It was something between recognition and a kind of reverence that sits just below the surface of a very controlled man. You need to put it back in her bag right now. Sir, I don't know who you think you are. No, Marcus said, and his eyes moved to Hargrove's face with the kind of focus that made Hargrove stop talking mid-sentence. You don't know who she is. That's the problem. Emma turned around. She looked at Marcus. For the first time since the whole ordeal began, something changed in her face. Not much, barely anything at all, but it was there. A flicker of something she didn't show other people, recognition. And underneath that, something that might have been relief, though she would never have called it that. Their eyes held for exactly 2 seconds. You know her? Hargrove demanded. No, Marcus said. I know what that badge means. Hargrove looked between them. He was starting to feel something he hadn't felt when this started. Uncertainty. He didn't like it. He covered it the way insecure men always cover uncertainty, which was with louder aggression. Look, I don't know what kind of show you two are trying to run here, but this is a federal security checkpoint, and I have the authority. You pulled classified military property out of a private bag, Marcus said. You held it up in a public space. You've been handling it without authorization for the last 6 minutes. He paused. Do you understand what that means? Hargrove opened his mouth. He closed it. Morris had gone very still behind the counter. He was looking at the badge differently now, looking at it the way you look at something when you suddenly suspect it might be hot. The crowd around them had grown. People who had been walking past had slowed and stopped. Phones were out, had been out since Hargrove had said what he said, but the mood had shifted. Nobody was laughing now. Nobody was looking at Emma the way Hargrove wanted them to look at her. Emma looked at Marcus for a moment longer. Then she looked at Hargrove. I told you what was in the bag, she said. Her voice had not changed at all. Still even, still quiet, still completely controlled. I told you I needed to be present for the inspection. I told you the badge was mine. She tilted her head slightly. I gave you every opportunity to do this correctly. Hargrove's jaw tightened. Lady, my name, she said, is not Lady. Rex made a low sound, not a bark, not a growl. Something between the two that carried in the air like a warning frequency. Several people near the front of the crowd took a small step back. Hargrove looked at the dog, looked at Marcus, looked at Emma, looked at the badge on the counter. For the first time in this entire encounter, Hargrove looked like a man who was not sure he was still in control of the room. He wasn't. He just hadn't fully understood that yet. Morris picked up the badge from the counter. He turned it over in his hands one more time, looking at the insignia, looking at the serial number on the back, looking at the specific classification markings along the edge that he did not have the training to interpret, but that Marcus Hale could read like a sentence. Put it back, Marcus said again, to Morris this time, softer, almost kind. Morris put it back. Emma watched him zip the duffel closed. She watched him set it on the counter. She reached out and lifted the strap onto her shoulder with one hand, the same way she had been carrying it since she arrived. And she adjusted the weight, and she straightened, and she looked at Hargrove one final time. Hargrove was staring at her, and in his eyes, behind the bravado that was still trying to hold its shape, there was something new, something small and uncomfortable that he would have a hard time naming if anyone asked him later. It was the beginning of understanding, not the full weight of it. That would come later, when he was alone, when the day was done and the crowd was gone, and there was no one left to perform for. But the edge of it, the first cold touch of realizing that you have badly misjudged a situation. Emma did not give him the satisfaction of watching it happen. She picked up her other bag from the bin. She collected her boots, her phone, her watch. She walked 3 steps away from the checkpoint. Marcus fell into step beside her, Rex on his other side. They didn't speak for a moment. 2 people, 2 different worlds, walking the same direction through a crowded terminal. Thank you, Emma said finally. She said it simply, no performance in it, no dramatics. I didn't do anything, Marcus said. Emma almost smiled. I know, that's why I'm thanking you. Marcus looked at her sideways. Rex trotted along between them, calm again now, tail low and easy. That unit, Marcus said quietly. I've only ever seen that insignia in... I know where you've seen it, Emma said. He nodded slowly. He had more questions. He left them where they were. Behind them, at the checkpoint, Hargrove was standing very still. Morris was pretending to look at a screen. The crowd was breaking apart the way crowds do when the main event is over. People peeling away in small clusters, some of them talking quietly, some of them already posting what they had just filmed, most of them carrying something they couldn't quite articulate, a feeling, an impression, the sense of having witnessed something they didn't fully understand, but knew was significant. The woman in the red coat was still standing where she had been. She watched Emma walk away. She watched the way Emma moved, steady, purposeful, completely unbothered, and she felt something she couldn't quite name, but that lived somewhere between admiration and awe. Somewhere in the terminal, a boarding announcement played over the intercom. Life moved on, the way it always does. But in the space Emma had occupied, standing at that checkpoint with her hands clasped and her eyes level, and her whole bearing the quiet evidence of a person who had endured far more than a blustering supervisor with a borrowed badge of authority, in that space, something lingered. Something that would not be easily shaken loose from the people who had stood close enough to feel it. The truth about who Emma Carter was had not been spoken aloud. It hadn't needed to be. Some things are louder than words. They walked in silence for nearly a full minute before Marcus spoke again. Not because he didn't have anything to say, he had plenty, but because he had learned a long time ago that silence was its own kind of language, and the woman walking beside him was fluent in it. Rex stayed close, his nails tapping lightly against the terminal floor, his body still angled slightly back toward the checkpoint, as though some part of him hadn't fully let it go yet. You're going to Atlanta, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. He had noticed her boarding pass when she tucked it into her front pocket at the checkpoint. Connecting, Emma said, then further south. Military business? She glanced at him sideways. Personal. Marcus nodded and didn't push. He understood personal. He was flying home for personal reasons himself, and the weight of that word was something he carried in his chest every time he said it. Personal meant something different when you had spent the better part of your adult life in places where personal things got left behind, like luggage you couldn't afford to carry. They stopped near a row of seats by gate 14. Emma set her duffel down and pulled the strap off her shoulder, rotating her arm once in the way people do when they've been carrying something for a long time, and the body finally acknowledges the effort. Marcus sat down 2 seats away, the professional distance of 2 people who don't know each other, but have found themselves in a moment that changed that equation slightly. Rex lay down between them without being told. Emma looked at the dog for a moment. Something in her face shifted, just barely, just for a second, in the way people's faces shift when they see something that disarms them unexpectedly. She looked back up. What's his name? Rex, Marcus said, though he won't answer to it unless he feels like it. Smart dog. Smartest thing I've ever worked with, Marcus said, and I've worked with some exceptional people. Emma almost smiled again. It was the same almost smile from earlier, the one that lived at the very edge of her expression and never quite made it all the way out. Marcus noticed it both times. He filed it away. Behind them, at the far end of the terminal, a commotion was beginning to build. Not the loud, chaotic kind, the quiet, institutional kind, which is somehow worse. The kind that involves radio frequencies and hushed conversations and supervisors calling other supervisors. Hargrove had retreated from the checkpoint and was standing near the TSA staff door with his phone pressed to his ear, his back to the public floor, his body language broadcasting something it was trying very hard not to broadcast. Morris, still at the checkpoint, was processing passengers with the mechanical focus of someone who desperately wants to look like nothing happened. But his hands weren't steady, and every few seconds his eyes moved down the terminal in the direction Emma had walked. The footage was already spreading. The woman in the red coat had posted her video 11 minutes after it was taken. 37 seconds of footage. Hargrove's hand grabbing the duffel, the badge being held up, the words being said clearly enough for the microphone to catch, and Emma standing completely still through all of it. The caption was 7 words. She didn't even blink. Who is she? In the time it took Emma and Marcus to walk to gate 14, the video had been viewed 4,200 times. By the time they sat down, it was over 9,000. Neither of them knew that yet. Marcus leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and turned his head toward Emma. I need to ask you something, and you don't have to answer. Then ask, she said. That unit, the insignia on that badge. He paused, choosing his words the way a person chooses footing on uncertain ground. I've been in this work for 11 years. I have clearances that most people in uniform will never see in their entire careers. And the only times I have ever seen that specific insignia were in classified settings, presented by people who made very clear that the information was need to know only. He looked at her directly. So I need to understand how a woman in civilian clothes at Reagan National Airport is carrying that badge in a medical duffel. Emma was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone deciding whether to lie. The silence of someone deciding how much of the truth to carry into the open. Because I earned it, she said. Marcus held her gaze. I don't doubt that. What I'm asking is what that means for the situation we just left behind us. Emma turned her head slightly and looked back toward the checkpoint. From where they sat, Hargrove was still on his phone. The staff door opened and a second man came out, older, different uniform, more silver on the collar. A senior supervisor. He leaned close to Hargrove and said something. And Hargrove's posture did something Marcus had seen in debriefs before. It went from defensive to small. It means, Emma said calmly, that the situation will resolve itself. It always does. That's a lot of faith to put in a system that just called you a thief in front of 200 people. I'm not putting faith in the system, Emma said. I'm putting faith in the fact that certain things, once they are seen, cannot be unseen. She glanced back at the checkpoint. He saw the badge. His agent saw the badge. You saw the badge. She paused. The badge is not subtle to the people who know what they're looking at. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, he didn't know what he was looking at. No, Emma agreed. He didn't, but you did, and that matters more than he understands right now. That was the moment Marcus decided to make the call. He didn't announce it. He didn't explain it to Emma. He simply stood, walked about 15 feet away to a quieter section of wall, and took out his personal cell phone. Not the one he used for standard communication, but the other one, the one with the contact list that most people would find very difficult to explain. He scrolled, found the number he was looking for, and pressed call. It rang twice. Hail, the voice on the other end was flat and professional, and very awake for a man who was, by Marcus's calculation, probably 2 time zones away from a comfortable morning. Chief, I need a verification check. I'm at Reagan National. I'm looking at a situation involving military identification from a classification level I can't speak to in open air. The badge was pulled from a civilian bag by TSA and handled publicly. I need to know if there's someone I should be contacting on the back end. There was a pause. The kind of pause that is itself a response. Describe the insignia. Marcus described it. 3 sentences. Very specific. The kind of specificity that only comes from having studied something with complete attention for a very short amount of time. Because you understood that time was what you had. Another pause, longer this time. Where exactly are you in the terminal? Gate 14 area, South Concourse. Don't move. The voice was still flat, but something had shifted underneath it. A frequency change that Marcus recognized. The frequency of a man who has just been told something he was not expecting. "Give me 8 minutes." The call ended. Marcus walked back and sat down. Emma was watching him, not with accusation, with the quiet attention of someone who notices everything and judges nothing. "You made a call," she said. "I did. To someone with reach. To someone who will make the right calls to the right people," Marcus said. "That badge getting handled in public is not a small thing. Whatever clearance level that unit operates at, that information is now technically compromised." Emma was quiet for a moment. "It's been compromised before," she said, and the way she said it, not bitterly, not dramatically, just factually, told Marcus more about her history than anything she could have explained outright. Rex lifted his head and looked at Emma. Then he did something he almost never did with strangers. He rested his chin on her knee. Emma looked down at him. This time the almost smile made it all the way out, briefly, quietly, and it changed her whole face for the 3 seconds it lasted. "He doesn't do that," Marcus said, and he meant it. "Animals know," Emma said. She set one hand lightly on Rex's head. "They always know." Marcus watched this for a moment. He had worked with Rex for 4 years. He had seen Rex respond to hundreds of people. He had never once seen him put his chin down on a stranger's knee unprompted. He didn't know exactly what to do with that information, but he noted it and he kept it. Back at the checkpoint, the senior supervisor had taken Hargrove by the arm and steered him firmly through the staff door. The door closed behind them. Morris, alone at the counter now, processed the next passenger with shaking hands and did not look up. In the staff corridor behind that door, Hargrove was having the worst conversation of his career. "You said what?" The senior supervisor's name was Ketterman. He was 56 years old, and he had been managing security operations at this airport for 14 years. He had navigated bomb threats, medical emergencies, a weapons smuggling attempt, and 3 separate incidents involving federal agents. He was not a man who rattled easily. He was rattled now. "She was being uncooperative," Hargrove said. His voice was still carrying the last traces of its earlier confidence, but they were eroding visibly. "The bag flagged. I had cause to." "I'm not talking about the bag," Ketterman said very quietly. "I'm talking about what you said to her. In public. In front of passengers." He held up his phone. "In front of cameras." He turned the screen toward Hargrove and pressed play. Hargrove watched the video. His jaw moved once. "That's already over 10,000 views," Ketterman said. He put the phone down. "And I'm going to set aside the conduct violation for a moment because we have a larger problem." He set a printed photograph on the table between them. It was a photograph of the badge. Hargrove's hands were visible in the image, holding it up. "Do you know what unit that badge belongs to?" Hargrove looked at the photograph. "It's not a real..." "It is real," Ketterman said. "I just spent 4 minutes on the phone with our federal liaison. That badge is not in any public registry because the unit it belongs to is not in any public registry." He leaned forward slightly. "You held classified military identification up in a public terminal and announced it over an open floor." A pause. "And then you called the woman it belongs to a name that I cannot repeat in this building." Hargrove's face was doing something complicated. "She's a nurse," he said, and his voice was smaller now. Reaching for the logic he had used earlier like a rope he could still hold on to. "She had a medical bag." "She is not a nurse," Ketterman said. "Or rather, she is not only a nurse. And whoever she is someone that the federal security coordinator for this airport just told me, in very direct language, we do not handle without authorization." He straightened up. "You're off the floor. Go to the office. Don't talk to anyone." Hargrove stood up from the chair. His legs felt slightly wrong. "What's going to happen?" Ketterman looked at him with the expression of a man who does not have time for the answer that question deserves. "That depends on a lot of people who are above both of us," he said. "Go." Hargrove went. At gate 14, Marcus's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. A message, 6 words. Pentagon liaison, 20 minutes. Don't engage. He put the phone away. Emma was watching the departure board. Her flight was in 40 minutes. She had the particular quality of stillness that Marcus associated with people who had spent time in operational environments. The ability to be completely present without broadcasting any of the internal activity underneath. Whatever she was thinking, whatever she was feeling about the last half hour, it was entirely contained, entirely hers. Marcus turned to look at her. "Someone's coming," he said. 20 minutes. Emma turned from the departure board and looked at him. "Pentagon? Liaison." She was quiet for a beat. "You didn't have to do that." "I know. It's going to complicate things." "For him," Marcus said, "not for you." Emma held his gaze for a moment. There was something moving in her expression that she was working to keep still. Not fear, not anger, something older than both of those. Something that looked a little like the weight of having been here before, of having had to be the one who stayed calm while someone else decided what your identity was worth. "I have been through that checkpoint 47 times in the last 3 years, she said. Not loud, not dramatic, just stated the way a fact is stated. 47 times with that bag and that badge and that equipment. And in 47 times, no one has ever touched it. No one has ever questioned it." She paused. Today was the first time. Marcus absorbed that. What was different today? Emma's eyes moved briefly back down the terminal toward the checkpoint, and for just a second, just one, something sharp and specific moved across her face. "He was having a bad day," she said, "and I was an easy target." She turned back to the departure board. "That's all it ever is." That sentence landed in Marcus's chest like something physical. He had heard similar things said in similar tones before. The particular flatness of someone who has been underestimated so many times that they have stopped being surprised by it, only tired. He recognized it because he had heard it from people he respected enormously, people whose capabilities would have made Hargrove's jaw drop. People who had been dismissed and belittled and talked over and stepped on by those with louder voices and smaller credentials. It made him angry in the quiet, controlled way that his training had redirected from reaction into resolve. Rex lifted his head and looked up the terminal. His ears moved forward. Marcus followed the dog's sightline and saw 2 men in suits moving through the crowd with the purposeful directness of people who have a specific destination and no patience for anything in their path. One of them was on a phone. The other was scanning the terminal. 20 minutes had been optimistic, apparently. The one scanning found Marcus first. A small nod of recognition. They had never met, but Marcus had been described well enough to be identified at a distance. Then the man's eyes moved to Emma. He stopped walking. He said something to his colleague. His colleague looked at Emma. His colleague's expression went through several things in approximately 2 seconds. Recognition, verification, something that looked very much like relief. They moved toward gate 14. Emma had not turned around. She knew they were coming. She always knew when people were moving toward her. It was a skill that did not leave you just because you were in an airport instead of a forward operating base. She waited. The first man stopped in front of her. He was in his early 50s, gray at the temples, the bearing of someone who had spent time in uniform before he spent time in suits. He looked at Emma directly, and his expression held something that was not standard issue federal employee professionalism. It was something more personal than that. "Miss Carter," he said, "my name is Reeves. I'm here on behalf of the Department of Defense. I want to apologize for what happened at that checkpoint today and assure you that the matter is being addressed at the appropriate level." Emma looked at him calmly. "And what level is that?" Reeves hesitated for exactly 1 second. "The highest appropriate level," he said carefully. "That's a very careful answer, Mr. Reeves. It's a very sensitive situation." "It became sensitive," Emma said, "when a federal employee grabbed my bag, handled classified property without authorization, and called me a name in front of 200 people. She held Reeves's gaze without blinking. I made it through that just fine. I always do. What I want to know is what you're going to do to make sure the next person who walks through that checkpoint with credentials they've earned in places no one is supposed to know about doesn't get the same treatment. Reeves looked at her for a moment. His colleague was typing something on his phone. Marcus had gone perfectly still in the way trained people go still when they want to observe without influencing. The supervisor has been removed from duty pending a full review, Reeves said. The footage has been flagged by our communications team, though as I'm sure you know, it is already in public circulation. Good, Emma said. Reeves looked slightly surprised. Let it circulate, she said. Let people see it. Let them ask the questions they're going to ask. She picked up the black duffel and set it on her lap, one hand resting on top of it. The answers are classified, but the question of whether a person deserves to be treated with basic dignity, that one is not. Silence settled over the four of them for a moment that was longer than silence usually lasts in a crowded terminal. Around them, the airport moved on. Announcements, rolling luggage, a gate agent calling for pre-boarding at a nearby counter. All of it continued, indifferent. Inside their small orbit, something heavier held the air. Reeves cleared his throat. Is there anything you need from us today? Any assistance? My flight boards in 32 minutes, Emma said. What I need is to be on it. Reeves nodded once, professionally. Of course. He reached into his jacket and produced a card. He held it out to her. If anything else comes of this, anything at all. Emma looked at the card without taking it for a moment. Then she took it and tucked it into the front pocket of her jeans, alongside the boarding pass, and she stood up. Rex stood up. He looked up at Emma, and his tail moved. Not the enthusiastic wag of a dog greeting a friend, but the slow, deliberate movement of a dog that has made a decision about someone and is expressing it in the only language available to him. Emma looked down at him one more time. She crouched briefly, right there in the terminal, and she put both hands on either side of Rex's face and looked at him directly, the way you look at something you want to remember. Rex looked back at her and was completely still. Then she stood, picked up her bag, and looked at Marcus. Take care of him, she said. He takes care of me, Marcus said. Emma nodded. She extended her hand. Marcus took it, and they shook once, firmly, the handshake of two people who have understood something important about each other without having to say it out loud. She walked toward the gate. Marcus watched her go. Reeves and his colleague were already moving in a different direction, speaking quietly to each other, the machinery of institutional response already in motion behind her. She didn't look back. She moved through the terminal the way she had moved through everything. Steady, direct, completely unburdened by the weight other people tried to put on her. Marcus sat back down. Rex lay back down. Marcus stared at the floor between his feet for a long moment. He thought about the badge and what he knew about the unit it represented. He thought about 47 times. 47 crossings. He thought about Emma's face when she said those words, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with the specific exhaustion of a person who has had to be strong in spaces that should not have required it. He thought about Hargrove sitting in a back office somewhere in this building, trying to reconstruct the series of decisions that had brought him to this moment. Then his phone buzzed again. His daughter's name was on the screen. He looked at it for a second, feeling the soft pull of something completely different from everything surrounding him. He answered, "Hey, baby girl." "Dad." Her voice was 10 years old and completely unaware of airport checkpoints and classified insignias and Navy SEALs sitting in plastic chairs with their whole chests heavy. "When does your plane get here? I've been waiting all morning." Marcus closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, his expression was entirely different from the one it had been wearing for the last 45 minutes. "2 more hours, sweetheart," he said. "Save some breakfast for me." Down the terminal, at gate 22, Emma Carter sat alone in the last row of seats. Her duffel was at her feet. Her boarding pass was in her hand. Her face was turned toward the window, and if anyone had been watching her, really watching her, they might have noticed what happened in the privacy of her expression in that unobserved moment. The composure was still there. It was always there. It was built from something that does not break under pressure, because pressure was the material it was made of. But underneath it, in the quiet space where no one was performing and no one was watching, and the day had finally stopped demanding things from her, something sat heavily behind her eyes. Not grief exactly, not anger, something older and more complicated than both. The particular weight of a person who has carried everything alone for so long that they have forgotten what it felt like to have someone simply stand beside them and say, without words, "I see what you are. I know what this cost you." She had not forgotten completely. Marcus Hale and his dog had reminded her. She stared out the window and she breathed, and the boarding announcement played overhead, and she stood up and she moved forward, as she always did, as she had always done. Always forward. The plane lifted off at 9:47 in the morning, and Emma Carter felt the familiar pressure in her chest that had nothing to do with altitude. It was the pressure of transition, the particular weight of moving from one world into another, from the place where something had happened into the place where it would have to be processed, carried, filed away alongside all the other things she had been carrying for years without setting down. She sat in the window seat, third row from the back. The seat beside her was empty. She preferred it that way, and she had learned over the years that something in the way she positioned herself, the angle of her shoulder, the directness of her gaze when people scanned the cabin for open seats, communicated, without words, that the empty seat intended to stay empty. Most people moved on without knowing exactly why. She put the black duffel in the overhead bin herself. She had not let an airline attendant touch it in 6 years. The clouds closed around the plane and the city disappeared below her, and Emma pressed 2 fingers against the window glass and allowed herself, for the first time since Hargrove's hand had closed around her bag that morning, to feel something. Not perform composure, not manage the room, just feel. What came up was not what she expected. It wasn't anger, though anger would have been justified. It wasn't humiliation, though the moment had been designed to humiliate. What came up, rising slowly from somewhere deep and quiet beneath the professional stillness she had built over 20 years, was a grief so old and so specific that she almost didn't recognize it at first. The grief of a person who has spent their entire adult life being invisible by necessity, and then discovers in one unguarded moment exactly how invisible they have become. 47 times. She had crossed that checkpoint 47 times, and not once had anyone pushed back. Not because they were intimidated, not because they recognized the badge, but because she had been quiet and cooperative, and she had made herself easy to process, and in doing so had made herself easy to dismiss. Today was the first time someone had chosen to look at her and see nothing worth respecting. She pressed her fingers harder against the glass. The thing about Hargrove, the thing that sat in her chest like a stone, was not the words he had used. She had heard worse. She had been in rooms where words like that were thrown like weapons by people with real authority, and she had survived every single one of those rooms. The thing about Hargrove was how casually he had done it, how little thought it had required, how quickly he had decided, without any information other than what she looked like standing in line at an airport, that she was less than what he was. That casualness, that was the stone. She breathed out slowly and let her fingers drop from the glass. Below the clouds, back at Reagan National Airport, the morning had not slowed down for anyone except the people directly caught in the gravity of what had happened. The terminal moved at its standard pace. Planes, passengers, the constant mechanical pulse of a functioning airport. But in the corridors behind the public floor, the pace was entirely different. Ketterman had been on 4 separate calls in the last 20 minutes. Each one had escalated in seniority. The first call had been to the airport's federal security coordinator. The second had been to a DoD field officer whose name Ketterman had never spoken aloud in a non-secure environment. The third had lasted 40 seconds and ended with the other party hanging up without a closing statement, which Ketterman had learned over 14 years was never a good sign. The fourth call was coming in now. He stepped into his office and closed the door and answered before the second ring. Ketterman. The voice on the other end was a woman. She spoke with the particular economy of someone who has stopped tolerating wasted words in conversation. My name is Director Callahan. I'm calling from a number that is not recorded in your contact history and will not appear there after this call. Do you understand what that means? Ketterman sat down slowly. Yes, ma'am. Good. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I need accurate, concise answers. The first one is this. Where is the badge now? It was returned to the owner. She departed the airport approximately 40 minutes ago on a connecting flight. A pause. And the footage? Already in public circulation. We flagged it through standard communications channels, but it moved faster than the flag. He paused. I believe Mr. Reeves's team was already aware. Reeves was there? He arrived on site, yes. He spoke with the woman. She declined most of what he offered. Of course she did. The director said it with a flatness that suggested she was not surprised in the least. Something else moved through her voice beneath the professionalism. Something that sounded almost like admiration, though she was careful with it. And Hargrove, what's his current status? Suspended with pay pending full conduct review. He's been advised not to speak publicly. Make that without pay, the director said immediately, and make sure his immediate supervisor understands that any statement from Hargrove to media or social platforms while under review will constitute a second conduct violation. Are we clear? Completely, Ketterman said. Good. Another pause, and this one had a different quality. A thinking pause, a calculating pause. I want everything from that checkpoint, every piece of footage from every angle, every written record of the interaction, every statement from every agent on duty. I want it packaged and on a secure server within 3 hours. Can you do that? Yes. One more thing. Director Callahan's voice shifted slightly, just enough to note. The woman, Emma Carter, she was calm throughout? Ketterman thought for a moment. He hadn't been on the floor when it happened, but Morris had given him a full account, and the other agents nearby had corroborated it independently. All of them had used some version of the same description. According to every account I've received, Ketterman said slowly, she was completely calm from the beginning to the end. Never raised her voice, never argued, just waited. A silence on the other end that lasted just long enough to mean something. That's who she is, Director Callahan said, and she said it in the tone of a person who is not discovering that information for the first time. She ended the call. Ketterman sat in his office for a moment with the phone in his hand, looking at the wall, feeling the particular unease of a man who has suddenly understood that the situation he has been managing is significantly larger than the situation he thought he was managing. He set the phone down and got back to work. In the back office where Hargrove had been sent, the morning was a very different experience. He had been sitting in the same chair for over an hour. He had been told not to use his personal phone, not to speak to other staff, and not to leave the room until someone came for him. A security officer had been posted outside the door, not confrontationally, just present, just there, and Hargrove was aware of him in the way you are aware of a clock ticking. He had replayed the interaction 12 times in his head. Each time, he started it with the same internal framework. She was uncooperative, the bag flagged, protocol required, he was doing his job, and each time the framework held for approximately 30 seconds before it collapsed under the weight of what came after. The badge. He kept coming back to the badge. He had held it in his hand, and he had felt, even in that moment, that it was real. Not the way a prop is real, not the way something bought at a novelty store is real, but the way a thing with history is real. dense and specific, and worn in ways that take years to develop. He had dismissed that feeling. He had covered it with performance, turned it into a joke, made the crowd complicit in his certainty, and the crowd had filmed it. He pulled up the video on his personal phone, despite the instruction not to. 41 seconds. He watched himself hold the badge up. He watched himself say the words. He watched Emma Carter stand perfectly still throughout, her hands clasped, her spine straight, her face expressing something he had interpreted in the moment as submission, and was now watching it back, recognizing as something entirely different. She had not been submitting, she had been waiting. There was a difference, and it was enormous, and he had not seen it until now. Watching himself perform certainty on video for an audience of strangers who were, according to the view counter climbing in the corner of the screen, currently numbering 412,000. Hargrove set the phone face down on the table. His hands were not steady. On the flight to Atlanta, Emma had stopped watching the clouds and started watching the other passengers the way she always watched people. Not staring, just aware, a full peripheral accounting of the cabin that happened automatically, the way breathing happens automatically. Because for a significant portion of her career, that kind of awareness was the difference between completing a mission and not completing anything ever again. The man in 12B was asleep with his mouth open, a crossword puzzle unfinished in his lap. The woman in 9A was texting with one thumb while her other hand gripped the armrest, a flyer who hadn't made peace with flying. A teenage boy in the middle section was playing a game on his phone and losing, judging by his expression. The flight attendant moving up the aisle had the efficient warmth of someone good at their job, who has also been doing it long enough to operate on a degree of autopilot. Normal. All of it completely normal. Emma absorbed it and felt something settle. She opened the small front pocket of the duffel she'd retrieved from the overhead bin and pulled out a worn photograph. It was not in good condition. The edges were soft, the image slightly faded, the glossy finish long since gone from the handling of years. It showed two people. One of them was Emma, younger by perhaps a decade, in a setting that was deliberately unclear. The other person was a woman approximately the same age, with a similar quality of stillness about her, both of them looking at the camera with the particular directness of people who have nothing to prove and know it. Emma looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then she tucked it back into the pocket, zipped it closed, and sat back. Her phone, which she had kept on airplane mode since takeoff, showed 14 notifications from a number she didn't recognize when she briefly toggled it on to check the time. She checked the number against her mental registry. It took 3 seconds. Then she turned airplane mode back on. The number belonged to a journalist, a specific journalist who covered defense and intelligence for a publication with a national readership and a reputation for being very, very thorough. She had been in Emma's peripheral awareness for 2 years, not as a threat exactly, but as someone worth monitoring. Someone whose instincts were good enough that she occasionally found threads that led closer to things than was comfortable. The journalist had apparently found the video. Emma was not surprised. She filed it, assessed the implications in the methodical way she assessed all implications, and made a decision. She would not engage. Not yet. The video was already beyond management. That ship had left port the moment the woman in the red coat posted it, and trying to suppress it would draw more attention than allowing it to circulate. What mattered now was what the circulation produced, and what it produced depended entirely on the questions people asked next. The plane landed in Atlanta at 11:53. She was the second person off. She moved through the concourse with purpose, duffel on her left shoulder, not checking her phone, not looking at departure boards, not performing any of the usual civilian choreography of airport navigation, because she already knew exactly where she was going and how long it would take her to get there. Gate C-22, 23 minutes, 1 turn, 1 escalator, 3 moving walkways. She had made this connection 17 times. She was 12 minutes from the gate when she became aware of the person following her. Not overtly, not incompetently, actually quite well, well enough that most people would never have noticed, which meant the person was trained. But Emma was not most people, and what she noticed was not the person directly, but the pattern. The specific rhythm of footsteps that mirrors your own pace without intending to. The way someone's reflection appears in a glass storefront twice in 3 minutes. The particular body orientation of someone moving through a crowd while watching a fixed point. The fixed point was her. She didn't slow down. She didn't look back. She made the turn toward the escalator, and at the exact moment her body would have been briefly outside the follower's sightline, she modified her pace by 2 steps and positioned herself behind a group of 4 travelers, which forced the tail to close distance or lose visual contact. The tail closed distance. Male. Mid-30s. Dark jacket. Not federal. The shoes were wrong, and federal tails in airports almost always wear better shoes because airports require standing. Not military either. Too much deliberate casualness. The practiced nonchalance of someone instructed to blend in rather than someone who blends in naturally. Private sector, intelligence adjacent possibly, or investigative or journalist. She adjusted her assessment, not the journalist she already knew about. Different energy, different gender, different approach, but the build and bearing of someone who had been given a description and an assignment this morning and was now following through on it with more commitment than skill. She made a decision. At the bottom of the escalator, instead of continuing toward C-22, Emma stepped to the right and stopped beside a row of seats. She set her duffel down, took out her boarding pass, and pretended to check it with the deliberate attention of someone who has realized they're in the wrong terminal. She counted to 7. The man in the dark jacket appeared at the bottom of the escalator. He saw her stopped. He hesitated for exactly the length of time it takes a person to make a decision they weren't prepared to make. Then he walked toward her. Emma looked up before he reached her. She looked at him with the direct, patient, completely unfrightened expression she had been wearing all morning, and she watched his stride break ever so slightly when her eyes found his, because he had been expecting to be the one doing the watching. He stopped 4 feet away. He had the look of a man rapidly revising his plan. "You've been behind me since baggage claim," Emma said. "Not accusatory, just factual." The man opened his mouth. "Don't," Emma said quietly. "You're not good enough at this to make up a story I'll believe, and we're both going to be better served if you just say what you came to say." A beat. The man looked at her for a moment, sizing her up the way people size up situations they've misjudged. And then he exhaled and dropped the performance entirely. "My name is Gary Pell," he said. "I work for the Atlantic Sentinel. My editor sent me a video this morning and told me to find you." Emma was quiet. "The video of you at Reagan National," he said, as though clarification were needed. "I know which video," Emma said. "Right." Pell shifted his weight. "Look, I know you probably get approached about this kind of thing." "I don't," Emma said. "And I know you probably don't want to talk, but my editor thinks there's something here, something bigger than a bad TSA agent. The badge in the video, nobody can identify the unit. Our defense correspondent looked at it for 20 minutes and came back with nothing. That's not normal." He paused. "That's actually very, very not normal. And combined with the way you handled yourself in that interaction. What do you want, Mr. Pell?" He straightened. 5 minutes. On record or off, your choice. Just tell me who you are." Emma looked at him for a long moment. She looked at him the way she looked at everything, fully, without flinching, processing more than was visible on the surface. She saw a man in his 30s who had a journalist's hunger and a decent person's uncertainty about whether he was doing the right thing. She saw someone who had been handed an assignment and was smart enough to know it was bigger than he'd been told, and honest enough to be slightly uncomfortable with that. She saw someone who, in other circumstances, she might have actually respected. "Off record," she said. Pell blinked. He had not expected that. Okay, yes, absolutely, off record. Emma picked up her duffel. Walk with me. I have a flight in 19 minutes. Pell walked with her. For the first 30 seconds, she said nothing, and he had the good sense not to fill the silence. They moved through the concourse together, and Emma let the ambient noise of the airport settle around them before she spoke. What you saw in that video, she said, is not unusual. It happens to people like me more often than anyone with the clearance to know about people like me would be comfortable acknowledging. It happens because the nature of what we do requires us to be invisible, and invisible people are easy to dismiss. She paused. Hargrove dismissed me because he could, because nothing in my appearance or behavior gave him a reason to reconsider. And in many situations, that is exactly what we want. But today it went wrong, Pell said carefully. Today it went public, Emma corrected. Whether it went wrong is a question with a more complicated answer. Pell was quiet for a moment, processing that. The badge. Can you tell me anything about the unit? No. Can you tell me what you do, even in general terms? Emma glanced at him. I save lives, she said simply, in places where the people whose lives I'm saving cannot acknowledge that they needed saving. Pell absorbed this. And the medical equipment in the bag is medical equipment, Emma said, the most literal interpretation of that phrase that you can imagine. They had reached the gate, C-22. The agent was beginning the boarding call for priority passengers. Emma stopped and turned to face Pell. Here is what I will tell you, she said, not for your article, not for anything you publish, for you, personally, so that you understand what happened this morning. She met his eyes. The man who humiliated me at that checkpoint will face professional consequences. The institution will review itself and make the appropriate administrative gestures. A statement will be issued. People will feel that justice has been done. She paused. And next week, somewhere in this country, someone else who looks like me, who carries what I carry, who has given what I have given, will stand at a different checkpoint, and someone with a different name, but the same casual certainty, will look at them and decide they are less than what they are. She picked up her bag. That is the story, Mr. Pell. Not my badge, not my unit, not who I am. The story is that this keeps happening, and the mechanism that allows it to keep happening is more durable than any single supervisor's career. Pell stood very still. He had his phone in his hand and he had not once moved to raise it, which told Emma something about him that the rest of the conversation had already suggested. Can I ask you one more thing? He said. She waited. The man with the dog, Pell said, the one who stepped in, who was he to you? Emma considered the question with the same honest attention she gave everything. A stranger, she said, who chose not to be one. She turned and walked toward the gate. Pell stood where she had left him and watched her hand over her boarding pass and disappear down the jetway. He stood there for another moment after she was gone, holding his phone in his hand, the recording app open on the screen, the one he had opened in his jacket pocket when she said, off record, hoping she wouldn't notice. The recording was empty. His hand had never pressed the button. He looked at the blank screen for a long time, and something settled in him. Not the satisfaction of a story landed, but the quieter and more durable satisfaction of a decision made correctly. He put his phone away and walked back the way he came. The second flight carried Emma south for 2 hours and 14 minutes. She slept for 90 of them, the clean, deep, dreamless sleep of a body that has learned to rest in windows, to take what is available rather than waiting for ideal conditions. When she woke, the cabin was quiet, and the light through the window was different, lower, golden in the way it gets over certain latitudes in the late morning. She stretched one hand and then the other. She checked her watch. She looked out the window at the land below, the particular geography of the region she was entering, which she recognized not by landmarks, but by the specific quality of the light and the color of the terrain, the way you recognize a place you have been to often enough that it lives in your body rather than your memory. She was almost there. Her phone, taken off airplane mode when the captain announced descent, lit up with the notifications she had been accumulating. She processed them quickly and without reaction. The 14 messages from the journalist she already knew about, a string of texts from a number saved only as R, a single message from a government email address that said nothing except, confirmed, safe travel. She paused on the text from R. There were 7 of them, sent over the course of the morning, each one short, each one carrying the specific weight of messages written by someone trying to remain calm about something they are not calm about. The first one. Saw the video. Are you okay? The second. Emma. The third. Call me when you land. The fourth, sent 40 minutes after the third. I'm calling Reeves. The fifth. Reeves confirmed you're all right. Still, call me. The sixth. I know you're on the plane. I know you have it off. I just need to hear your voice when you land. That's all I'm asking. The seventh, sent 20 minutes ago, the most recent. I made soup. Emma read that last one twice. Something moved in her chest that was entirely different from the stone she had been carrying all morning. Something warmer and more complicated and significantly harder to manage. She pressed her lips together and looked out the window at the land coming up to meet them. She typed back 4 words, landing in 10 minutes. She put the phone away. The wheels touched down at 1:41 in the afternoon, and Emma Carter was already standing when the seatbelt sign went off. Duffel in hand, ready to move. The way she was always ready to move. Forward, always forward, into whatever came next. What came next, today, was a door she knew. A person behind it she trusted with a precision and a depth that she trusted very few things in her life. A bowl of soup that meant I was afraid and I didn't know what else to do. And everything else that bowl of soup carried without being able to say it out loud. She walked off the plane into the warm southern air. She did not look back. The door opened before Emma reached it. That was how it always was with Rachel. She heard things before they happened. Or rather, she paid the kind of attention to the world around her that made her seem like she did. She had been standing in the narrow hallway behind the front door for 4 minutes, Emma would later learn, just standing there with her arms crossed and her jaw set, and her eyes doing the thing they did when she was holding something in that she was not prepared to release into the open air. Rachel Navarro was 43 years old. She had spent 12 years as a combat surgeon with the Army before a roadside device in a province whose name she no longer said out loud had taken the full function of her left hand and redirected the entire trajectory of her life. She walked with a slight lean now, more from habit than necessity, the body's memory of a time when the lean compensated for something it no longer needed to compensate for. She was small and dark-haired, and she had a stillness to her that matched Emma's in some ways and differed in others. Where Emma's stillness was armor, Rachel's was infrastructure. The bones the whole thing was built on. She looked at Emma standing in the doorway with the duffel on her shoulder and the boots still on her feet, and the long morning written somewhere in the set of her mouth, and she said nothing for a full 3 seconds. Then she said, "Come inside." Emma came inside. The door closed behind her. The sounds of the outside world, the birds, the distant highway, the specific quality of southern afternoon air, sealed off. Emma set the duffel down against the wall and straightened, and before she could say anything, Rachel's arms were around her. Not gently, firmly, the way a person holds something they were afraid they might not get to hold again. And Emma stood still inside it for a moment, and then she held on back, and neither of them said anything, and it lasted longer than either of them would have predicted. Rachel pulled back first. She looked at Emma's face with the clinical directness of a surgeon and the non-clinical directness of something older and more personal than medicine. "You're not hurt," she said. "I'm not hurt," Emma confirmed, "but something happened." "Something happened," Emma said. Rachel exhaled to her nose. She turned and walked toward the kitchen, and Emma followed because that was the language they had built between them over 9 years. Follow me when I need to move, stay when I need to stay, and always, always come to the table when I put food on it. The soup was already in a bowl. It was a thick vegetable broth with pieces of chicken and what looked like every vegetable Rachel had available. Because when Rachel was worried, she cooked. And the volume of what she cooked was directly proportional to the intensity of what she was feeling. The bowl was generous. Emma sat down in front of it and wrapped both hands around it and felt the warmth move through her palms and up her arms. "Talk," Rachel said. So Emma talked. She told it plainly, the way she told everything. In order, without editorializing, without performance, starting with the line in the conveyor belt and Hargrove's face, and working through to the badge on the counter, and the words said in front of 200 people, and Rex putting his chin on her knee, and Pell's recording app that he didn't press. She talked for 14 minutes, and the soup went from hot to warm, and Rachel sat across from her with her elbows on the table and her chin on her clasped good hand, and she listened the way she listened to everything, completely, with the whole of herself. When Emma finished, Rachel was quiet for a moment. 400,000 views, Rachel said. She had been tracking the video since the moment it appeared. She had watched it 7 times. Each time, she had watched Emma's face. And each time the part that made her jaw tighten was not the words, though the words were bad enough, but the expression on Emma's face. The complete, unshakable, terrible patience of it. "It's over 600,000 now." Emma looked up from the soup. "I know. People are asking questions. I know that too." Rachel stood up and moved to the window, not to look out, just to stand somewhere that wasn't the table, somewhere that gave her body permission to feel what she was feeling without it landing directly on Emma. "I want to be angry," she said. "I am angry. I've been angry since 6 this morning when this thing appeared on my phone. But I know you well enough to know that if I sit here being angry about it, you're going to spend the next hour managing my reaction instead of having your own." She turned around. "So I'm going to ask you something, and I need the honest answer, not the operational one." Emma set down the spoon. "Go ahead. How are you actually?" The question sat between them. Emma looked at Rachel, at the specific texture of her concern, the way it came without conditions, without the institutional overlay that everything else in Emma's life tended to carry, and she felt, for the second time today, the dangerous loosening of something she kept very tightly wound. "Tired," Emma said, and then, after a pause, "I'm tired, Rach." Rachel sat back down. She didn't say anything. She just sat, which was the right thing. "Not from today," Emma said. Today was one bad actor and his bad day. I've survived considerably worse. What I'm tired of is the calculus, the constant calculation of how to be present in a space without making the space uncomfortable. How much to explain, how much to withhold, how to signal enough to get through without signaling so much that someone gets frightened and calls someone else. She picked up the spoon again. "I'm 41 years old, and I have given the last 20 years to work that cannot be named or claimed or put on a resume. And today a man decided in 4 seconds that I was a thief and a liar and someone who deserved to be spoken to like something he scraped off a floor." She was quiet for a moment. "And the most infuriating part is that I understand exactly why he was able to do that. Because I built it that way. The invisibility was the point. I just didn't account for how much it would cost to maintain." Rachel was looking at her with an expression that was not pity. Pity would have been an insult, but something that held all the weight of knowing someone completely and watching them tell the truth out loud for the first time in a long time. "You've never said that before," Rachel said softly. "No," Emma agreed. "I haven't." Outside, the afternoon was moving. The light was shifting. The world continued with the cheerful indifference it maintained toward every private reckoning happening within it. And inside, around a kitchen table with a bowl of cooling soup, and two women who had both given things that could not be given back. Something shifted that had been needing to shift for a long time. At 2:47 in the afternoon, Eastern Time, the video crossed 1 million views. The comments section had developed its own ecosystem, the way comment sections do when something catches the public in a particular tender spot. There were the people who were angry, straightforwardly, volcanically angry, the kind of anger that needed somewhere to put itself and had found a target. There were the people who were parsing the badge with the focused energy of amateur analysts, posting screenshots and comparisons and theories that ranged from almost accurate to entirely fictional. There were the veterans, dozens of them, then hundreds, who posted their own experiences in their own words, quietly, without fanfare, each one a brick in a wall that was becoming impossible to ignore. And then there was the post from Marcus Hale. He had not intended to post anything. He had landed in his home city 3 hours after leaving Washington, had been met at the arrivals gate by his daughter, who was 10 years old and had worn her best shoes for the occasion, and had been tracking his flight on a tablet since it departed, and had spent the first hour of his return doing what mattered most, sitting on the living room floor with her while she showed him everything she had made and learned and become in the 4 months he had been gone, which was considerable because she was that kind of kid. Rex lay across his feet. His daughter periodically leaned against Rex's side without seeming to notice she was doing it, the way children lean against large dogs, naturally, unself-consciously, as though it were a right rather than a privilege. It was his daughter who found the video. She was showing him something on her tablet, a project she'd made for school, and the video auto-played from a recommended feed. She hadn't been looking for it. It had found her. She watched 5 seconds of it and then looked at her father with an expression that was so direct and so clear that it reminded him, with a force that hit somewhere deep, of Emma Carter's face at the checkpoint. "Dad," she said, "was that the lady from the airport?" Marcus went still. "What?" She turned the tablet toward him. On the screen was a paused frame of the video, Emma standing at the checkpoint, hands clasped, eyes level. The timestamp in the corner read, "This morning." The view count read 812,000. Marcus took the tablet very carefully from his daughter's hands. "I don't know how you know about that," he said. "It's everywhere," she said simply, with the confidence of a 10-year-old describing the internet to someone who had been out of contact for months. "It's been everywhere since this morning. Were you there? Do you know her?" Marcus looked at the paused image for a long moment. He looked at Emma's face, captured mid-incident, mid-humiliation, mid-everything. And he thought about what she had said at gate 14, 47 times. He thought about her walking away from the checkpoint and how she had walked, straight and steady, as though the weight of what had just happened had simply been absorbed and filed alongside everything else she had been carrying for 20 years. He handed the tablet back to his daughter. "Go get ready for dinner," he said quietly. "I'll be right there." She looked at him for a moment, reading him the way she always read him, with an accuracy that still surprised him after 10 years. Then she went. Marcus sat on the floor for another minute. Rex lifted his head and looked at him. Marcus looked back. Then he picked up his phone and typed something he had not planned to type. Not for the public, not for the video's comment section, not for any strategic or institutional reason. He typed it the way a person types when the only alternative is saying nothing, and saying nothing in that moment was something he couldn't live with. He posted it to his personal account, which had 300 followers and which he had not updated since a photograph of Rex 3 months ago. He wrote, "This morning at Reagan National Airport, I watched a federal employee grab a woman's bag without authorization, handle classified military property in a public space, and speak to her in a way that was degrading and wrong. I want to be clear about what I also watched. I watched her stand through every second of it with more dignity than most people manage in their best moments. I don't know everything about who she is. I know enough. She served. She served in ways that I, with an 11-year special operations career, have enormous respect for. Treat people with the basic respect they have earned and the basic respect they deserve as human beings. Those are the same thing. He put his phone down. He went and helped with dinner. He didn't look at the phone for another 2 hours, which meant he missed the moment his post was screenshot and shared by an account with 300,000 followers, and then by another with 2 million, and then by a retired Army general with a verified account who added 3 words to the repost. This, full stop. By 7 o'clock that evening, Marcus Hale's 300 followers had become 47,000. He still hadn't looked at his phone. Back in the southern house, Emma had eaten the soup and was sitting with Rachel at the kitchen table with something between them that was not a plan or a strategy, but was beginning to feel like one. Documents, photographs, a worn leather notebook that Emma had been keeping for 11 years, filled with dates and locations and names written in a shorthand that only she could fully decode. "How much do you want to use?" Rachel asked. Emma turned a page. "None of it," she said. "I don't want to use any of it for this." Rachel frowned. "Then what?" "I want to use the fact of it," Emma said. "Not the content. I don't want names. I don't want units. I don't want classified information in a public record. I want the shape of it visible." She looked up. "People can understand the shape of something without being told what's inside." Rachel looked at her for a moment. "You've been thinking about this longer than today." "I've been thinking about this for 3 years, Emma said. And that was true. The incident at the airport had not started a new line of thought. It had accelerated one that was already moving. She had been watching for 3 years the steady accumulation of evidence that the structure she operated within was producing, as a byproduct of its necessary secrecy, a category of harm that no one was being held accountable for, because accountability required acknowledgement, and acknowledgement required visibility, and visibility was what the whole system was built to prevent. Hargrove had been the thing that brought it to the surface. He was not the cause, he was a symptom. The knock at the front door came at 7:23. Emma and Rachel looked at each other. Rachel was already moving before Emma stood. She reached the door and checked the small camera mounted above the frame. A habit, not a formality. And then she turned back to Emma with an expression that had shifted from cautious to something harder to read. "It's Reeves," she said. Emma set down the notebook. "Alone?" Rachel checked again. "He brought someone." Emma walked to the door and opened it herself. Reeves was standing on the small porch in the same suit he had been wearing at the airport, which meant he had come directly. The person beside him was not the colleague from the terminal. This was a woman Emma had never seen in person, though she recognized her immediately from other means. Tall, silver-haired, with the specific quality of a person who has made very large decisions for a very long time and carries that weight not as a burden, but as an orientation. Director Callahan. Emma had known this name for years. She had not known this face. "Ms. Carter," Callahan said. Her voice was exactly what it had been on the phone with Ketterman. Economical, direct, not unfriendly, but not performing friendliness either. "I apologize for appearing without proper notice. I'd like to speak with you." Emma stepped back from the door and let them both in. Rachel made coffee without being asked. She made it strong because she always made it strong, and she set it in front of 4 people at the kitchen table and then sat in the 4th chair herself, which Callahan noted and did not challenge. "I'm going to be direct with you," Callahan said. She had her hands flat on the table, not holding the coffee yet, the body language of someone who wants to establish terms before comfort. "What happened this morning created a situation. Not for you. You handled yourself correctly, and I want to acknowledge that explicitly. For the institution, the footage is significant. The public response is significant, and the specific nature of your identification is creating a very difficult set of questions that people are asking in spaces where they should not be asking them." "I know," Emma said. "There are people who want this managed quietly," Callahan continued. Standard procedure, statement of accountability, disciplinary action, some visible consequence for the supervisor, and then closure. Put a lid on it before the questions about the badge gain any more traction. She paused. I am not one of those people. Reeves, Emma noticed, looked slightly surprised by this. He had not known what Callahan was going to say. That was interesting. Emma looked at Callahan steadily. What are you then? Callahan picked up her coffee. She drank it once, set it down, and looked at Emma with the expression of someone who has made a decision that they made alone, without committee, without consultation, and is now delivering it. I am someone who has read your complete file, she said, which is a file that I, at my clearance level, should not have been surprised by, and was. She paused. I'm also someone who has 3 daughters, and I have been in rooms over the course of a career that spans 31 years, where I have watched people who look like you, and like me, and like the woman sitting to your left, be dismissed and diminished and documented incorrectly because the people doing the documentation couldn't reconcile what they were seeing with what they expected to see. She held Emma's gaze. I am not interested in the quiet management of this. I am interested in what you want. The kitchen was very still. Rachel's hand, wrapped around her coffee cup, did not move. Reeves was looking at the table. Emma looked at Director Callahan for a long moment. Really looked, the way she looked at everything, with the full weight of her attention. She looked at the 31 years in Callahan's bearing, the 3 daughters in the specific quality of her directness, and the decision made alone in the fact that Reeves didn't know she was going to say this. I want 2 things, Emma said, and they're not about me. Callahan waited. The first is a review of how identification and equipment belonging to personnel at my classification level are handled at standard civilian checkpoints. Not my checkpoint, all of them. Because if it happened to me at my access level, it has happened to others who had less capacity to manage it. Callahan nodded once. And the second? The supervisor, Emma said, not punished, educated. She watched Callahan's expression for a reaction and found, to her quiet satisfaction, that what she found there was not surprise, but recognition. Punishing him closes the loop. It says the problem was one man. The problem is not one man. Educating him keeps the loop open. It says the problem is a gap in understanding that we are now going to actively close. She paused. That's harder than punishment. It takes more time, more resources, more institutional honesty, but it's the only version of this that actually changes anything. The silence that followed lasted exactly long enough. Then Director Callahan set down her coffee cup, straightened her spine, and looked at Emma Carter across a kitchen table in a house at the end of a southern afternoon, with an expression that contained, among other things, the particular recognition of one person seeing another clearly for the very first time. Tell me about the review, she said. I want the specific gaps you've identified, all of them. Emma opened the worn leather notebook, and she started talking. Outside, the evening came in the way evenings come in the South, slowly, softly, with more warmth than the calendar strictly warranted, the air carrying the particular weight of a day that had asked a great deal of the people moving through it. The light dropped by degrees, the way light drops when it has time, unhurried and complete. Inside, 4 women sat around a table and built, slowly and deliberately, the skeleton of something that had been needed for a long time. Not a story for the public, not a statement for the press, something quieter and more durable and infinitely more difficult. A structural change to a structural problem, proposed by the person who had paid most directly for the gap and received by the person who had the authority to begin closing it. Rachel refilled the coffee twice. Neither Emma nor Callahan noticed. They were working. At 9:17 that evening, Gary Pell's editor sent him a message asking for 2,000 words on the airport incident by morning. Pell sat at his hotel desk in Atlanta, opened his laptop, and stared at the blank document for 6 minutes. He thought about Emma's face. He thought about the recording app he had never pressed. He thought about 4 words, a stranger who chose not to be one. He typed his editor back. I can't write this one. Not the way you want it. I'll explain when I'm back. He closed the laptop and looked out the window at the city moving below him, and he felt something he did not have a precise word for, but that lived in the neighborhood of rightness. The quiet, uncelebrated rightness of having not taken something that wasn't his to take. And in a house in the South, at a kitchen table under the low warm light, Emma Carter turned another page of the notebook and kept talking. The notebook ran out of pages at 11:43 at night. Emma had not realized it until she turned to what she expected to be a blank page and found instead the cardboard backing of the cover, smooth and brown and final. She stared at it for a moment. 11 years of entries, dates, coordinates written in code, names in shorthand, observations filed with the precision of someone who understood that memory was unreliable and documentation was everything. 11 years of a life that could not be spoken about in ordinary rooms, compressed into one worn leather book that was now complete. She set down the pen. Callahan, sitting across from her, noticed. She looked at the notebook, then at Emma's face, and she said nothing, because she had learned enough about Emma Carter in the last 4 hours to know when silence was the correct response. Rachel was asleep on the couch in the next room. She had lasted until 10:30 before her body overruled her stubbornness, and she had fallen asleep sitting upright with her arms crossed and her chin dropped to her chest. And neither Emma nor Callahan had woken her because some things are more important than protocol. Reeves had left at 9:45 with a phone full of notes and a directive from Callahan that he had received without visible reaction, but that had clearly recalibrated something in his operational understanding of the evening. He was efficient, and he was good at his job, and he had spent most of his career being both of those things in service of an institution that he was, Emma suspected, currently reconsidering from a new angle. Callahan picked up her own pen and drew a line under the last item on her legal pad. She had filled 4 pages. Her handwriting was precise and small, and she underlined specific words with the particular habit of someone who has taken notes in high-stakes rooms for 30 years and developed a personal taxonomy of emphasis. This is enough to begin, she said. It's enough to do more than begin, Emma said. Callahan looked at her. Yes, she said, it is. She paused, and in the pause was the specific weight of someone deciding how honest to be. She chose completely honest, which was, Emma had discovered over the last 4 hours, the only gear Callahan actually had. I want to tell you something that I should have said at the beginning of this conversation. Emma waited. I have known about your unit for 9 years, Callahan said. Not everything. The file I accessed had significant redactions even at my clearance level, which tells you something about the depth of the classification. But enough. Enough to know the category of sacrifice involved. She held Emma's gaze with the directness of someone who had practiced this kind of honesty until it no longer required practice. I should have done something about the checkpoint protocol gap 3 years ago, when the first incident report crossed my desk. Emma went very still. There was an incident report. There were 2, Callahan said. Neither of them yours. Both from personnel operating at adjacent classification levels who experienced similar treatment at different airports. Both reports were filed, reviewed, and categorized as isolated conduct violations. Both supervisors received written warnings. She paused. I read both reports, and I noted the pattern, and I moved on to the next item on my agenda. Another pause, longer. That was a failure of judgment on my part, and I own it. The kitchen was completely quiet. Emma sat with this for a moment, not with anger. She had moved through anger a long time ago, on the plane, in the 30,000 feet of sky between Washington and Atlanta, where she had allowed herself to feel the stone in her chest and then decided what to do with it. What she sat with now was something more complex. The particular complexity of being told, clearly and without excuse, by a person with real authority, that they had failed and they knew it. It was not something Emma was accustomed to receiving. It landed differently than she expected. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you deserve the complete picture," Callahan said, "and because any review I build on the back of this conversation that doesn't include my own failure to act earlier is not a review, it's a performance. And I don't do performances." She sat back. "You told me earlier that you want Hargrove educated rather than punished, that the problem is a gap in understanding, not a single bad actor. I agree with that completely, and I want to be accountable to the same standard I'm asking him to be accountable to." Emma looked at Callahan for a long moment. 9 years, 2 prior reports, the particular loneliness of being part of a category of problem that had been seen and not addressed for years landed briefly on Emma's chest, and then moved through it because she did not have the luxury of living there, and she never had. "Then let's make it mean something," Emma said. Callahan nodded once, with the finality of a decision that has already been made and is now being confirmed rather than initiated. "I fly back tomorrow morning. I have a meeting with the deputy secretary at noon. This is going on the agenda." The deputy secretary. Emma absorbed the level of that without reacting to it outwardly. "How much are you going to be able to say without compromising the classification?" "Enough," Callahan said. "The classification protects the specifics. It does not protect the principle." She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair and stood. "The principle is simple. People who have served at the level you have served deserve to move through the world without having to prove their worth to someone who is having a bad Tuesday." She looked at Emma one more time before she turned to leave. "I'll be in contact within 48 hours. She went. Emma sat alone at the kitchen table in the quiet house and listened to Callahan's car back out of the drive and disappear down the road. And then she listened to the specific silence of a house where someone is sleeping in the next room, which is a different quality of silence than an empty house. Warmer, less absolute, the silence of a space that is occupied and cared for and known. She closed the notebook. She sat with her hands flat on the table, not moving, not performing anything for anyone because there was no one to perform for. And she felt the full weight of the day settle into her body the way weight settles when you finally stop moving. The line at the checkpoint, Hargrove's hand on the bag, the words said in front of 200 people. Marcus and Rex and the gate and the soup and the notebook, and Callahan's voice saying, "I should have done something 3 years ago." All of it. Every ounce. She breathed in. She breathed out. She got up, washed both coffee cups in her soup bowl, dried them, put them away, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. That was Emma Carter. That was who she was. The day ends, you clean up after it, and you sleep, because tomorrow will require you to be present, and you cannot be present if you have spent the night being crushed by the past. She slept deeply and without interruption until 6:12 in the morning. Across the country, in a federal building that maintained its operations regardless of the hour, a different kind of machinery was also running. The footage had crossed 2.3 million views by midnight Eastern Time. By 3 in the morning, it had been featured on 4 major news networks as a trending story, each framing it slightly differently. Excessive force, identity dispute, viral moment, veteran mistreatment, none of them having enough information to frame it correctly, all of them circling the edges of a story whose center they could not access. The badge in the footage was a specific gravity point. Every defense journalist who saw it had the same reaction Pell's defense correspondent had. Silence, then a very careful second look, then a phone call to someone with higher clearance than themselves. None of those phone calls produced answers. That in itself was an answer. At 6:45 in the morning, Hargrove arrived at the airport for what he had been told was a required meeting with human resources. He had slept approximately 2 hours. He had spent the remaining hours of the night cycling through the stages of a man processing a professional catastrophe. First denial, then blame, then the slow, grinding work of honest accounting that happens when the defenses finally exhaust themselves, and the truth is the only thing left in the room. He sat in the HR office across from a woman named Patricia Cho, who had been with the airport for 22 years and had the particular compassion of someone who has delivered difficult news often enough to have learned how to do it with humanity intact. She did not lead with a disciplinary action. She led with a question. "Tell me what you were thinking," she said. "From the beginning, not what you did, what you were thinking." Hargrove looked at her. He had prepared for several versions of this meeting. This version was not one he had prepared for. "I thought she was being uncooperative," he said. "The bag flagged and she started giving conditions and He stopped. He rubbed his hand across his face. "I was already having a bad morning. We were down 2 agents. The line was backed up. And when she started with the requests, He stopped again. "You decided," Patricia said gently. "I decided," he said. The words sat there between them, very plain and very heavy. "I decided before I had any information." He looked at the table. "I've been doing this job for 15 years and I've never..." He stopped a third time, and this stop was different from the others. This one had something cracked in it. Patricia let the silence sit for a moment. "Do you know who she is?" Hargrove looked up. "No, not specifically. They won't tell me specifically. But you know enough." He was quiet for a moment. "I know she served," he said. "I know it was at a level that people like me don't have the clearance to understand the full scope of." He exhaled. "I know the dog reacted to her the way trained military dogs react to people they recognize as part of their world." He paused. "I know I stood in front of a woman who has probably seen and survived things I cannot imagine, and I spoke to her like she was..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Patricia did not finish it for him. "What do you want to do with that?" she said. Hargrove looked at her. It was a question he had not expected from an HR meeting. It was a question that required something different from him than defensiveness or apology. It required intention. "I want to be different," he said, and he said it simply, without performance, which was the first simple and unperformed thing he had said in this context since the whole thing began. "I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I know I don't want to be the person I was at that checkpoint yesterday." Patricia nodded. She folded her hands on the table. "That's where we start," she said. "That's exactly where we start." At 7:30 that morning, Marcus Hale woke to 47,000 followers and a direct message from a retired 4-star general he had served under for 2 years, which read in its entirety, "Well said, son. She earned every word of it." He showed it to Rex, who was unimpressed. His daughter made him pancakes with slightly burnt edges and served them with the particular pride of a child who has accomplished something significant, and Marcus ate every one of them and told her they were perfect, which they were, because the person making them was. Later, when she was at school and the house was quiet, and Rex was lying in his usual spot by the back door, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his coffee, and he thought about Emma Carter walking away from gate 22. He thought about the way she had held Rex's face in her hands and looked at him, and the specific quality of that moment, the brief dropping of the guard, the glimpse of something underneath the composure that was softer and more human and more tired than anything the terminal had seen. He thought about 47 times. He picked up his phone and recorded a 60-second video. He did not script it. He did not rehearse it. He sat at his kitchen table in a plain shirt with slightly burnt pancake residue still on the plate beside him, and he spoke directly into the camera with the same quiet voice he had used at the checkpoint. "I've gotten a lot of messages since last night asking me to say more about what happened yesterday. I'm going to say one thing, and then I'm done talking about it publicly because the woman involved didn't ask for attention, and I'm not going to give her more than she wants." He paused. "What I want people to take from yesterday is not outrage. Outrage burns hot and goes cold fast and doesn't change anything structural. What I want people to take from it is this. There are people in this country who have given things the rest of us will never fully understand, operating in conditions most of us will never know, who then have to come home and navigate a world that cannot see what they are because what they are has to stay hidden. He looked directly into the camera. That invisibility protects the mission, but it also means they move through public spaces without the protections that visibility provides. That gap needs to close, not with anger, with attention, with actual structural change. He stopped the recording. He posted it and put the phone face down on the table. By noon, that 60-second video had been shared 400,000 times. At 10:53 in the morning, Emma's phone rang. Not a number she recognized. She almost didn't answer. She did. The voice on the other end was a woman, older, with the accent of a specific region of Louisiana and a directness that reminded Emma, oddly, of Rachel. "Miss Carter, my name is Dolores Washington. I'm a retired Army nurse, 31 years. I saw a video yesterday of a young woman at an airport, and I've been trying to find a way to reach you since 6 o'clock last night." A pause. "I need to tell you something." Emma sat down on the edge of the bed. "I'm listening." 11 years ago, I was at Dallas-Fort Worth with my medical bag and my credentials, and a security agent who decided I was lying about who I was. He didn't go as far as the man yesterday went, but he went far enough. Another pause, and in it was 11 years of something that had never been said out loud. I didn't say anything afterward. I didn't report it. I told myself it wasn't worth the energy, and I moved on. And I have thought about that decision at least once a month for 11 years. Her voice was steady, but it was holding something. What you did yesterday, the way you stood there, the way you didn't break, that was for me too. I want you to know that. What you did was for every one of us who ever stood in a line and got small because it felt safer. She paused one last time. "Thank you." Emma pressed her free hand flat against her knee and sat with the weight of those two words for a moment. "Mrs. Washington," she said, "what happened to you was wrong." "Yes," the woman said simply. "You should have been able to say that 11 years ago." "Yes," she said again. "You're saying it now," Emma said. "That counts." A silence, and in it something released. Emma could hear it, the specific quality of a long-carried breath finally let go by someone who had been holding it long enough that they'd forgotten it was possible to breathe differently. "It does, doesn't it?" Dolores Washington said softly. Not a question. "It does," Emma confirmed. They talked for 23 minutes. Emma did not check her phone for the rest of the morning. The meeting between Director Callahan and the Deputy Secretary ran 47 minutes over schedule. Callahan had walked in with 4 pages of notes. Emma's identified structural gaps, 2 prior incident reports, and the particular posture of someone who has decided that the meeting is going to end differently than the agenda suggests. She laid the documents on the conference table, and she laid out the argument with the economy and precision of someone who has been building it since midnight and is not interested in the parts of the conversation that don't move toward the conclusion. The Deputy Secretary was a man who had spent 28 years navigating institutional resistance with what his staff called productive stubbornness. He listened to Callahan without interrupting, which was how he listened to everything, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment that was genuinely thoughtful rather than performatively deliberative. "The review you're proposing," he said, "cross-agency? All civilian checkpoints with documented interaction with classified-level military or intelligence personnel," Callahan said. "A protocol review, a training revision, and a reporting structure that actually reaches the level where it can be acted on rather than filed. Timeline? 90 days for the initial framework. Full implementation in 6 months." He looked at the documents. He looked at the 2 prior incident reports. He looked at the specific language Callahan had used to describe the structural gap, which was Emma's language, refined through 4 hours of kitchen table conversation and 11 years of a worn leather notebook. This is going to require budget authorization and interagency coordination that is not going to be simple, he said. No, Callahan agreed, it's not. And the public situation, the video, is separate from the policy need, Callahan said firmly. The video created the visibility. The policy need predates the video by at minimum 3 years and likely significantly longer. I'm not asking for this because it went viral. I'm asking for it because it's correct. The deputy secretary was quiet for another moment. Then he looked up at Callahan with the expression of a man who has just confirmed something he had already been leaning toward. Start the framework, he said. Bring me the 90-day outline. Callahan gathered her documents. She allowed herself, in the elevator down, exactly 5 seconds of something that was not quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood. Then the doors opened and she was back in the work, and that was exactly where she wanted to be. 3 weeks later, Emma Carter walked into a conference room in a federal building in Washington and sat down at a table with 12 people who had varying degrees of awareness of who she was and what she had done, and why her presence in that room was not a political gesture or a public relations exercise, but the most efficient possible use of the specific knowledge she possessed. She had the black duffel at her feet. She had the badge, properly documented and handled this time, in her front pocket. She had no notes because she didn't need them. She had 11 years of memory and 1 completed notebook, and the particular kind of authority that comes not from rank or title, but from having paid for the knowledge you carry with the actual substance of your life. She looked around the table and she began. She was not angry. She was not performing recovery or resilience or any of the other things people wanted her to perform for them. She was simply present, completely and without reservation, doing the work she had always done, in a room that had finally been built around the right questions. In the back of the room, Callahan sat with her legal pad and her small, precise handwriting and her 4 pages of notes. And she listened the way she had listened at the kitchen table, completely, with the whole of herself. 2 rows away, Reeves had a pen in his hand and an expression that had been recalibrated significantly over the last 3 weeks. Neither of them spoke. Emma talked for an hour and 40 minutes without stopping, and when she was done, the room was very quiet, and the deputy secretary, who had cleared his schedule to be present, looked at the documents in front of him and then looked at Emma Carter and said something that Callahan would remember for the rest of her career. How long has this needed to be said? Emma looked at him directly. About 20 years, she said, give or take. He nodded slowly, with the weight of someone receiving an accurate answer that is also an indictment, and holding it correctly rather than deflecting it. Then we're overdue, he said. Yes, Emma said. We are. Back in the South, Rachel was making dinner in the small house that had held the beginning of everything, standing at the counter with her good hand working, in the low afternoon light coming through the window, the same way it had come through 3 weeks ago, when Emma had walked through the door, carrying a stone in her chest that had taken 20 years to name. She was making soup again, because some habits are not habits, but rituals. And this one meant, I am here, and you are coming home, and nothing that happened out there gets to take this from us. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Emma. Landing at 5. Save the good spoon for me. Rachel smiled. She put the phone face down and kept cooking. And somewhere in the air between Washington and the South, Emma Carter sat in the window seat of a plane she had taken 48 times now, with her duffel in the overhead bin, and her hands loose in her lap, and her eyes on the land below. And she felt something she had not felt in a long time, something clean and forward-facing that did not require management or suppression or any of the complex professional machinery she had spent 20 years maintaining. She felt it simply, the way you feel things when you have finally stopped bracing against them. She pressed 2 fingers against the window glass. 48 times. Each one counted. Each one cost something. And now, finally, Each one meant something beyond the crossing itself. Each one was evidence of a person who had moved through the world carrying more than most people knew, giving more than most people would, and standing, when it mattered, with her hands clasped and her spine straight and her eyes level, immovable in the face of every force that told her she was less than she was. She had never been less than she was. She had only ever been exactly, completely, profoundly what she was. And the world, slowly, was learning to see it.